Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. I used to think Rachel was my world. We met young, just before life's weight really settles, and we clicked in a way that felt magnetic. She was studying to be a nurse, driven by a passion to help people, and I was just starting my own IT business, full of dreams and grit. We had each other's backs through every struggle: student loans, crazy work schedules, late-night dinners of cheap takeout. We saw each other's hard days, comforted each other, built something real. At least, that's what I thought. For years, everything seemed perfect. Our friends called us the couple that had it all. Rachel would laugh it off, saying it wasn't that simple, but to me, she made life feel like it could be. We saved up, bought a house, and made future plans we both cared about. I wasn't prepared for that to change, never thought I'd even have to think about it. It all started with something small, almost too minor to notice. One night, Rachel mentioned she was staying late at the hospital for a team meeting. It wasn't unusual for her to pick up extra shifts or spend time with colleagues, so I didn't question it. But when she came home that night, something was off. Her kiss was rushed, her smile distant. She was there, but not really. I brushed it off at first, maybe she was tired, maybe it was just a long day. But these little moments kept stacking up. A few times, I'd catch her on her phone, smiling down at a text with a look she didn't often give me anymore. When I'd ask what was so funny, she'd brush it off, saying it was just a friend from work. And then there were the nights when she didn't come home right away. She'd say she was out with friends or had to stay late at the hospital, but I'd lie in bed waiting, listening to the quiet tick of the clock, feeling a strange emptiness creeping in. It was a Saturday morning when the first real piece of evidence fell into my hands. Rachel had gone out for a run, so I decided to take her car in for a tune-up. As I adjusted the seat, I noticed a slip of paper sticking out of the glove box, a crumpled hotel receipt with the date from just 2 days prior. It was for a place I knew well, about an hour away, and definitely not somewhere she'd go with her colleagues. My mind raced, but I shoved the thought down. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation, some innocent reason for this. But even as I tried to believe that, a gnawing suspicion took root in my mind. That night, I found myself unable to sleep. I kept thinking about that receipt, about all the little signs I'd ignored, each one now vivid and pressing. I had always trusted Rachel, and the thought of her betraying me felt ridiculous, impossible, even. But that piece of paper was real, and so was the strange way she had been acting. I decided then to look closer, but not confront her. I wanted the full picture, to know for sure before saying a word. Over the next week, I started paying attention to every detail. I'd glance over her shoulder when she was on her phone, take note of any new charges on our shared credit card. Small things here and there caught my eye: transactions at restaurants we'd never been to, late-night ATM withdrawals in parts of town she never mentioned. With every discovery, the feeling in my stomach worsened, but I stayed quiet, pretending everything was normal. I wanted concrete proof, not just suspicion. The following Friday, Rachel told me she was going out with some girlfriends from work. Her smile was bright, her eyes glancing past me as she kissed my cheek goodbye. She was dressed up, more than usual, and for a moment, I almost forgot my suspicion, feeling a flicker of warmth seeing her so excited. But as she closed the door, I felt the cold weight of reality settle back in. This wasn't just a night out, I could feel it in my bones. I followed her that night. She drove across town, stopping at a dimly lit bar where I watched from a distance. She parked and walked inside, and soon after, I saw him, a tall, dark-haired man with a smirk that stretched too wide as he waited by the bar. They embraced like old lovers, not like colleagues or friends, and I felt a sharp pain cut through my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice she had made, and it had shattered everything I thought we shared. I stayed long enough to see them leave together, disappearing into the night. It took everything in me not to follow them, not to storm in and demand answers, but I knew better than to react in anger. I wasn't ready for confrontation, and I didn't want her to know that I was onto her just yet. I wanted control, to gather everything I needed before making a move. Back at home, I sat in the dark, thinking over the past few weeks, every moment that led to this. I was filled with a numb clarity. I could see clearly now that this wasn't just some innocent mistake, or a temporary lapse. Rachel had betrayed me, knowingly, and now there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made plans. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed, wasn't going to let her wreck everything we'd built together without consequence. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The next Monday, I met with a lawyer. We discussed my options, and she advised me to keep everything under wraps for now, not to tip Rachel off. I started the process of securing my assets, moving things out of our joint accounts, setting up a separate one in my name. I wanted to make sure that by the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late for her to fight back. As the weeks went by, I continued my act. I still played the role of the loving husband, still laughed at her jokes, still kissed her goodbye every morning, even though my heart was miles away. Every time she left the house, I felt a mix of anger and satisfaction, knowing that she was oblivious to what was coming. Then, 3 weeks after I had first seen that hotel receipt, I was ready. I packed her things while she was out, stacking her clothes, her jewelry, her books, all the things that no longer held any warmth for me. The house felt cold, hollow, stripped of any love that might have lingered. Rachel came home that night to find everything laid out neatly by the front door. She looked at me, confused, her eyes darting between me and the boxes. I stood there, calm, watching her take it all in. "What's all this?" she stammered, her face pale as she took a step back. "Oh, it's time you moved on, Rachel," I said, my voice steady, every word carrying the weight of the betrayal she'd hidden. "I've already filed for divorce." She opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. She looked around, as if expecting some hidden camera, a punchline to the nightmare unfolding in front of her. I let her stammer, her face shifting from shock to desperation as she realized there was no going back. She knew I knew, and for once, she couldn't escape with a smile or an excuse. As she pleaded, I felt nothing but a hollow satisfaction. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences alone. I wasn't interested in explanations or apologies. She had lost the right to either the moment she chose someone else. In the end, she left with nothing but her suitcase, the remnants of what we once had crammed into a single bag. And as she drove off into the night, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet release that told me this chapter was finally closed. I was free, and ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. After Rachel left, a strange calm settled over me. The silence in the house felt heavy but clean, like the air after a storm. I sat alone that night, in the living room we had filled with memories, feeling a strange combination of relief and emptiness. Our marriage, the love I thought would last forever, had ended in a single day. I told myself that I was okay, that this was what I needed. But deep down, I felt the edges of something darker, anger, betrayal, and a bitterness that I knew would take time to heal. The next few days were surreal. I went to work, went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I'd catch myself staring off, thinking about moments with Rachel that were now tainted. Every memory felt like a lie I hadn't realized I'd been living. The nights were harder. I lay in bed, haunted by visions of her with that man, laughing, sharing a life she had hidden from me. But instead of confronting these emotions head-on, I threw myself into work. Running my IT business became my salvation. I poured every ounce of energy I had into growing it, taking on new clients, staying late, working weekends. I became a fixture in my office, a man on a mission. My team noticed the change. They would throw each other glances, a bit confused, probably wondering why I was suddenly so intense. But I ignored their questions, staying focused, determined not to let the betrayal seep into my work. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started running into people who didn't know what had happened. Friends, family, people who hadn't heard about Rachel and me splitting up would ask casually, "How's Rachel?" Every time, it felt like a small dagger twisting in my chest. At first, I'd hesitate, trying to find the words, but eventually, I started giving them the truth. "Rachel and I aren't together anymore," I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady. Some people would press, others would back off, realizing they'd hit a nerve. I could see the pity in their eyes, the awkward attempts to be supportive. They'd say things like, "If you ever need to talk," or "It's her loss," but none of it made a difference. My pride wouldn't let me accept their sympathy. I just wanted to move forward, away from the pity in the questions, and start fresh. One Saturday, I decided to start clearing out the house. Our home was filled with memories, each room a reminder of what I'd lost. Rachel's things were gone, but her presence lingered like a ghost. The kitchen, where we'd cooked meals together, laughing and sipping wine, the living room, where we'd spent countless lazy Sundays watching movies. I couldn't stand it any longer. I decided that it was time to make this space mine again. I started with the bedroom. The first step was getting rid of the bed, that shared space that now felt tainted. I dragged it out to the curb and ordered a new one. I painted the walls a deep, dark green, a color Rachel had always hated, but one that felt rich and comforting to me. I replaced the curtains, bought new sheets, and turned the bedroom into something unrecognizable, something that no longer held any trace of her. Next, I tackled the living room. I swapped out the photos on the walls, replacing pictures of us on vacations and family gatherings with landscapes, abstract art, anything that didn't remind me of her. I replaced the couch, the coffee table, everything I could afford to replace. It felt cathartic, like I was shedding an old skin, shedding her, creating a space that was solely mine. As I cleaned, a memory came to mind that I hadn't thought about in years. When we first bought the house, Rachel had insisted we bury a small time capsule in the backyard, a silly little idea she thought would be fun. She'd written a letter to future US and placed it in a small tin along with a few trinkets, a keychain from our first trip together, a movie ticket from our first date. I hadn't thought about it in years, but that Saturday, as I stood looking out the window at the backyard, I felt a sudden urge to dig it up. I grabbed a shovel and headed out, the cool evening air biting at my skin as I found the spot near the big oak tree. I dug down, my heart pounding, until I finally felt the metal tin beneath the soil. I pulled it out, wiped away the dirt, and opened it. Inside were the trinkets I remembered, and there, folded neatly, was Rachel's letter. I held it in my hands, feeling a surge of emotions I couldn't quite place. Part of me didn't want to read it, didn't want to revisit the promises she'd made back then. But another part of me needed to see the words, needed to remind myself of what I'd lost and what I was letting go of. Unfolding the paper, I read her handwriting, messy and rushed, filled with the excitement and hope we'd once shared. She'd written about our dreams, our plans for the future, how she couldn't wait to grow old with me. I felt a painful twist in my chest, a reminder of the love that had once been real, the love that I'd believed in so completely. But that love was gone, replaced by something hollow and false. I folded the letter and put it back in the tin, feeling a strange sense of closure. Burying the tin again, I felt a weight lift, as if by putting that piece of our past back into the ground, I was finally letting it go. I walked back into the house, my steps feeling lighter, my mind a little clearer. As the weeks went by, the loneliness crept in. I hadn't realized how much of my life had revolved around Rachel, how much I depended on her presence. The silence in the house felt oppressive at times, a constant reminder of what I no longer had. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness that had taken her place. But I forced myself to get through it, to let the pain and anger wash over me without giving in. It was around this time that I reconnected with an old friend, Tom. He'd heard about the divorce and reached out, inviting me to grab a drink. I hesitated at first, not sure I was ready to talk about it. But I went, figuring it was time to start building my life back up, even if it felt like I was piecing together shattered glass. Tom was a good listener, and he didn't pry. We talked about work, about the old days, about anything but Rachel. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was part of the world again, like I was something more than just a man recovering from betrayal. As the night went on, I opened up, telling him bits and pieces of what had happened. He listened, nodded, offering a few words of support, but mostly, he let me talk. It was what I needed, a release I hadn't realized I was holding back. After that, Tom became my lifeline. We'd meet up every weekend, grab a drink, go to a game, anything to get me out of the house. Slowly, life started to feel normal again. I began meeting new people, expanding my social circle, and finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten in the shadow of my marriage. Then one evening, as we were watching a game at a bar downtown, Tom turned to me, a glint in his eye. "You ever think about dating again?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing the waters. I laughed, shaking my head. "It's too soon, man," I said. "I'm not ready for that." "Come on," he pressed. "Not even a little curiosity? Just to see what's out there?" I shrugged, feeling a mix of hesitation and intrigue. Part of me wanted to move on, to prove to myself that Rachel hadn't destroyed my ability to trust or love. But another part of me was scared, afraid of opening myself up to that pain again. Still, as the night went on, Tom's words lingered. Maybe it was time to move forward, to let myself heal by finding something new, something that wasn't tainted by betrayal. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew that staying in the past would only keep me trapped. And so, that night, as I drove home, I made a decision. I would try, slowly, carefully, to put myself back out there. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to anyone, but for myself, to start building a new life unburdened by the weight of the past. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a strange sense of hope, a flicker of something new on the horizon. It was faint, but it was there, a promise of better days, of healing, of the chance to rebuild, one step at a time. I wasn't exactly sure how to put myself back out there. I hadn't been single in years, and dating felt like a foreign language I'd forgotten. I had no clue where to start, but I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the past, tangled in memories of Rachel's betrayal. I decided to give myself a chance at something new, even if it felt a bit daunting. Tom, of course, was all too eager to help. The next time we met up, he peppered me with suggestions, most of which involved dating apps and bars. "It's just the way things are done now," he said, grinning like this was all some grand adventure. "Swipe right, swipe left, it's easy." Reluctantly, I downloaded an app that night, feeling slightly ridiculous as I set up a profile. I wasn't sure what to write, and each prompt seemed designed to elicit the kind of light-hearted charm I didn't feel. After a few minutes of overthinking it, I settled on something simple, added a recent photo, and put my phone away. It felt strange and uncomfortable, like I was betraying a part of myself just by being open to the idea. Over the next few days, I got a few matches. Some were casual, quick chats that fizzled out as soon as they began. But one conversation caught my attention, a woman named Claire, who seemed genuine and warm. She was a teacher, loved hiking, and had a sarcastic sense of humor that made me laugh. We spent days messaging back and forth, and before long, we agreed to meet up for coffee. The morning of our date, I felt a nervous energy buzzing through me. It had been so long since I'd done this, and a part of me worried I was too rusty, too jaded to enjoy it. But when I arrived at the cafe and saw her smile as she walked through the door, I felt a flicker of excitement I hadn't felt in years. We talked for hours, about everything from work to books, to family stories. It felt effortless, like I was reconnecting with someone I'd known in another life. As we laughed over shared stories, I found myself letting go of the tension I'd been carrying, the anger and betrayal that had weighed me down. For a few hours, I was just me, not the man scarred by betrayal, but someone new, someone rediscovering the simple joy of connection. After that, we started seeing each other regularly. It was never anything too serious: dinners, hikes, an occasional movie night. But there was a comfort in our routine, a balm to the wounds Rachel had left. Claire was kind, understanding, and never pried into my past. She seemed to sense that I needed time, that I was still healing, and she gave me space to figure things out. But as wonderful as things were with Claire, the shadow of my past still lingered. On nights when I was alone, the memories crept back in. Rachel's betrayal, the nights I'd lain awake wondering where she was, who she was with. I thought I'd let it go, but sometimes, I'd find myself awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the pain I thought I'd buried. One night, as Claire and I were walking through the park, she stopped and turned to me, her expression serious. "You know, you don't have to pretend with me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I can tell there's something holding you back." I looked at her, caught off guard. I hadn't realized how much I'd been keeping from her, how much of myself I'd been hiding. She squeezed my hand gently, her gaze steady. "It's okay if you're not ready to talk about it," she continued. "But just know, I'm here. You don't have to carry it alone." Something inside me cracked at her words. I hadn't told anyone about the details of Rachel's betrayal, not even Tom. But here was Claire, offering to share the weight, to be a safe place for me. It felt terrifying and freeing all at once, the idea of opening up and letting someone else into the wounds I'd kept hidden. That night, after we'd said our goodbyes, I went home and sat in the quiet of my living room, staring at the walls that had once held memories of Rachel and me. I thought about Claire's kindness, her patience, and I realized that if I wanted a future, I had to face my past. I couldn't keep pretending that I was fine, that Rachel's betrayal hadn't left scars. I had to let it out, even if it was messy, even if it hurt. The next day, I invited Tom over. We sat on the porch, beers in hand, the sun setting over the neighborhood. For a while, we made small talk, catching up on work and mutual friends. But eventually, I took a deep breath and told him everything: Rachel's affair, the lies, the night I found that hotel receipt. He listened in silence, his face a mix of anger and sadness, but he didn't interrupt. When I was done, he let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Man, I had no idea," he said quietly. "I knew something was up, but, that's rough." "It was," I said, feeling a strange relief in finally saying it out loud. "But I don't want it to define me. I'm trying to move on." Tom nodded, clinking his beer bottle against mine. "You will," he said. "You already are. And Claire, she seems good for you." I nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude for both of them, for their patience and understanding. Talking to Tom felt like shedding an old skin, like I was finally letting go of the anger that had kept me chained to the past. And with that release came something new, a sense of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild. The weeks went by, and my relationship with Claire deepened. She became a constant in my life, a source of stability and warmth. But no matter how happy I was, I knew I had one final step left. There was one part of my past I hadn't confronted, one loose end that I couldn't ignore. One night, after much deliberation, I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel's number. It rang a few times before going to voicemail, and I felt a pang of relief. But a moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "Hey. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Is everything okay?" I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she left, and the thought of facing her again filled me with a mix of anger and anxiety. But I knew I couldn't truly move on until I confronted her, until I closed this chapter for good. "Can we meet?" I typed, my fingers hovering over the send button. After a moment's hesitation, I pressed it, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a place we'd gone to once or twice in the early days of our relationship. When I walked in, she was already there, seated at a corner table, her eyes flickering with a mix of surprise and unease. She looked different, older somehow, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. We exchanged polite greetings, the small talk awkward and stilted. Finally, I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye. "I didn't come here to rehash everything," I began, my voice steady. "I just needed to understand, why. Why did you do it?" She looked down, her fingers twisting nervously around her coffee cup. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I was unhappy, I guess. I wanted something more." "More?" I repeated, feeling a flicker of anger rise up. "We had everything, Rachel. A life, plans, love, or at least, I thought we did." She looked up, her eyes filled with regret. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could explain it better, but I don't have a good reason. I messed up, and I hurt you. I'll regret that for the rest of my life." For a moment, I considered telling her about Claire, about the life I was building without her. But as I looked at her, I realized I didn't need to. She was already haunted by the choices she'd made, already living with the consequences. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Take care, Rachel," I said, the weight of our past lifting as I walked away. I didn't look back, didn't need to. I had finally closed the door on that chapter, and for the first time, I felt truly free. As I walked out into the night, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a calm that I hadn't felt since that first night of betrayal. I was ready to move forward, ready to build a life unburdened by the ghosts of my past. And as I thought of Claire, I knew that I was ready to let love back into my life, to let someone in fully and openly. The scars would always be there, but now, they were a part of me, not chains holding me back. And for the first time, I felt ready, truly ready, to embrace the future. After that final meeting with Rachel, I felt like I'd finally let go of the last shadow of our marriage. A part of me had been braced for something, a confrontation, maybe, or some final reveal that would tear open old wounds. But seeing her, remorseful and resigned, reminded me that there was nothing left between us but empty memories. I was free, and I felt ready to step into my future without her ghost lingering. Things with Claire grew deeper, warmer. With Rachel gone from my mind, I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone. She was a grounding presence, someone who brought me back to life without even trying. We spent weekends hiking, cooking together, making new memories that felt fresh and real. She became more than just a partner, she was my closest confidant and friend, someone I could envision being with long-term. For the first time in years, I began to see a future filled with hope and possibility. Then one Friday evening, as we were putting dishes away after dinner, Claire set down a plate and looked at me, a little nervous. "I have something to tell you," she said, fidgeting with a napkin, her gaze flickering to the floor. A chill ran through me. I thought back to the meeting with Rachel, the string of betrayals, and the feeling of not knowing who to trust. I swallowed, bracing myself, trying not to let past fears bleed into the present. "Go on," I said, keeping my voice steady. She took a breath and looked up, her eyes searching mine. "I know I haven't told you much about my past relationships. And there's a reason for that." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It's okay," I said. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Claire took a deep breath. "A little over a year ago, I was in a complicated relationship. I was seeing someone, but it wasn't exclusive. And there was a man he was married. I didn't know at first, but when I found out, I stayed involved with him, even though I knew it was wrong." She paused, watching me carefully, as if trying to gauge my reaction. The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to react immediately. Her words dredged up painful memories, familiar wounds that hadn't quite healed. "Claire, why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She closed her eyes briefly, as if to gather strength. Because, the man I was seeing, it was your ex-wife's affair partner. I didn't know at first, of course. But by the time I figured it out, I was already in too deep, and he was, she trailed off, wincing. It was a mistake. And when I finally broke it off, I left town, moved here to start over. But then I met you, and everything just felt right. I didn't know how to tell you, and then it felt like too much time had passed, and I was scared. A strange numbness crept over me as her words sank in. I was frozen, unable to process what she'd just revealed. The woman I'd let into my life, the one who had been my solace, my support, she had been connected to the very betrayal that had shattered my marriage. I took a step back, feeling my breath come in shallow, unsteady gasps. So, you knew. You knew what happened to me, what Rachel did, and you said nothing. I didn't know about you at first, I swear, she said, her eyes wide, pleading. I left him long before I met you. I never imagined I'd meet you, let alone fall for you. When I realized who you were, I felt like telling you would ruin everything. But you kept it from me, I said, my voice cold. You let me open up to you, let me trust you, knowing full well that you had been part of the mess that destroyed my life. Tears streamed down her face, her expression raw and desperate. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I was trying to start over. I didn't know how to tell you without losing you. I felt torn between the affection I had for her and the bitter sense of betrayal twisting inside me. It was like reliving the pain of Rachel's affair all over again. And yet, I could see the agony in Claire's eyes, the genuine remorse etched into her face. Did you love him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head fiercely. No. It was complicated, but it was never love. I was a mess back then, searching for something I didn't understand. I made mistakes, ones I'll always regret. But what I feel for you, that's real. That's different. I turned away, pacing the kitchen as my mind reeled. Every memory we'd shared felt tainted, every laugh and intimate moment shadowed by this one revelation. I struggled to breathe, to think clearly, as the weight of her confession bore down on me. I don't know if I can do this, I finally said, my voice cracking. After everything I've been through, I don't know if I can keep letting people in, just to find out there's more to the story I didn't know. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for mine, but I pulled back. Please, she whispered. Please don't shut me out. I know I should have told you sooner. I know I hurt you. But I'm not that person anymore. Being with you changed me, helped me realize who I wanted to be. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her a chance to prove that she was different now. But the other part of me, the part still raw and wounded, screamed at me to walk away, to protect myself from more pain. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely steady. I can't. I just need some time to process all of this. She nodded, tears still glistening in her eyes. I understand, she whispered. Take all the time you need. Just know that I love you, and I'm here, whenever you're ready. I watched her leave, the echo of the door closing feeling like the end of something fragile and beautiful that had slipped through my fingers. I sat in the quiet of my home, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like an old, familiar ache. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance from Claire. I needed space, needed to sort through the tangled mess of emotions she'd unearthed. I thought about the nights we'd spent together, the laughter, the way she'd helped me find myself again. And I thought about her secret, the connection she had to the darkest chapter of my life. The duality of it left me torn, unsure of what to believe. One evening, as I was sitting alone in my living room, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire. It was a single line, I'll wait for you as long as it takes. I stared at the message, feeling a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, sadness, longing, and, surprisingly, hope. She was willing to wait, willing to give me the time I needed to heal, even if it meant facing the truth of her past. After a long, sleepless night, I made a decision. I picked up my phone and texted her, asking if we could meet. When we saw each other, there was no need for words. She looked at me, and I could see the weight of her regret, the quiet strength she'd gained through waiting. And in that moment, I realized that I had a choice. I could either let my past control me, or I could take a risk and let myself love again, scars and all. I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers in mine. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be. But as we stood there, facing each other, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet, fragile sense of peace. I was ready to build something real, something that could withstand the weight of our shared past, because in the end, we were both survivors, choosing to live beyond our mistakes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, unexpectedly whole.